Well, happy Monday. At least I think it's Monday. I'm pretty sure it's Monday. I don't know. These days of the week kind of run together. At least they do for me, Simon. I don't know about you. I can officially say good evening because I know, in fact, it is evening for you. And as predicted, your family has made an appearance. So
yeah, perfect timing just at the start, didn't it?
I mean, this is one of those things I actually really appreciate about the last couple of years with this whole remote life is we've all gotten a view into our friends and coworkers' lives that we weren't normally afforded. You know, like my cat.
And there's your cat just turned up, like you said.
Exactly. You know, and the other one at some point will just make a drive-by. And my cat has scheduled meetings. He's Slacked people. He's emailed people. You know, I like to joke that at this point, I believe my cats could probably deliver about a third of my material. You know, at least it's
impressive.
I could be wrong. But they would just have some disdain for it because they're cats. You know, they'd be very condescending about it. But anyway. Well, good evening, my friend. Thank you for hanging out with me. I appreciate it here on a random Monday. So for people who somehow mysteriously don't know you, what's your background? What's your origin story? How did you end up in this strange software space that you and I inhabit?
How far back do you want to go?
As far as you want to go, man. We can go back to the beginning of time if you want. First there was light, and then there was et cetera, et cetera. You know, funny. Afawell says, I've been trying to teach my cat to code. I think she understands it, but is just unwilling to apply herself. You know, that's probably not too far off, honestly, that a lot of cats probably could do it, but they're like, nah, not going to happen. I don't want to work that hard. I'd rather sleep.
Cool. So
go ahead. So origin stories, far back as you want to go, Simon.
So my background is really being a software developer. Mostly I worked in London for small consulting companies. So when I graduated from university after doing computer science, I did the whole interview thing where you'd kind of go around and interview for all the big consulting companies. And I just kind of found them really boring. And I went for this one interview, and it was this little tiny company in London who were like 25, 30 people at the time. And they just kind of wowed me. So I thought, yeah, that sounds much cooler than working for these big companies. So I joined a small consulting company in London. Started out doing Power Builder. Do you know Power Builder? Yeah, wow. Power Builder, 4GL from back in the 90s. So I did that for a couple of years. And Java popped up. So let me backtrack. So I graduated in 96. And Java was released quite shortly after that. Mm-hmm. And I kind of stumbled across Java, and it was something I wanted to do. So I was kind of one of the people in the company who kind of promoted and pushed the company to go in that direction. And so I got into Java quite early, sort of in the late 90s. And that's really what I've been doing mostly ever since, working for small consulting companies, predominantly London for the first half of my career. And mostly doing finance-related work. So lots of our customers were investment banks, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And the stuff I used to do is build software generally with our customers. So a bank would come to us and say, we would like to build some software. Can we have like 4 or 5 of your people to come join us? Right. So it was called body shopping, which is a horrible term, but it was actually quite fun. And we would go build systems basically as consultants and contractors for banks. So yeah, I did that in London for about 12 years. And then I moved back to Jersey in the Channel Islands, which is where I live now. I was born in Jersey. That's the pool there. And it turns out there's not much Java in a small island like Jersey, but there is a bunch of .NET stuff. So I jumped across to the .NET stack, and did the same thing. Worked for a small consulting company over here, and built systems as consultant for banks. I mean, there's lots of banks in a place like Jersey, right? And there's a whole little ecosystem of banks and data centers because of all the tax rules and data jurisdiction, et cetera, et cetera. So I did that same sort of thing for about 4 or 5 years, and then went independent, doing what I'm doing now, which is really software architecture, training workshops, and then there's some other tooling stuff off the back of it. So that's my condensed origin story, I guess.
So my friend and colleague Layla and I like to argue about capitalization rules. Why does .NET do it wrong? From your perspective as both a Java and a .NET programmer, why do they insist on doing their capitalization incorrectly?
An I interface name. Why? That's unnecessary.
Right. Yeah. It is funny. Some of those trivial changes like that, that's, at least for me, kind of jump out at you when you're trying to read that code. And you're like, huh, that's not the way we used to do it.
Yeah. So I ported one of my Java libraries to C#.net, and you can pretty much do it automatically. So you you do like search and replace for a bunch of things and change the case of the first name and methods, and it generally works out okay.
Yep.
Move the curly braces.
Yeah, it's like tabs versus spaces. Some of the things that we tend to fixate on, if we're being more honest with ourselves, take a step back. Like it's just an arbitrary choice that somebody made, and we all just followed it. You know, don't sweat it. It's not a big deal. You know, it doesn't really change anything. But that's funny. You and I have a very similar background, although I didn't do the .NET piece. I've spent a lot of my career writing Java in big enterprise companies for, you know, financial services kind of things, and it's interesting because they have a lot of money and they like doing lots of software, and so that tends to work out well. They also tend to have a lot of baggage because they've been doing it longer than most people, and you know, we talk about that as legacy, and I think it's unfortunate because like heritage is probably better. But you know, what was your experience dealing with systems that have been around for a while? And you know, do you have any advice for people on how to work well with existing code and translating that over to a modern architecture?
So I've been involved in a bunch of projects where we either had to integrate with legacy systems or heritage systems. We had to replace them. So one project I did was a C or C++ conversion to Java. That was back in the early 2000s.
Wow.
And the project was literally, here's the C or C++ source code, make it work in Java. I'm like, I don't do C or C++ though, so that was quite entertaining. And so integration, replacement. I think one of the funniest projects I worked on was a company wanted to build a web front end for doing stuff. And all of the core data was sitting in an old VAX VMS system. And so we had to figure out how to get data out of that VAX VMS system. And the answer was to do some batch jobs, to do like a nightly export.
Sure.
But of course, the problem is the data format is weird.
Right.
So in this particular example, rather than storing dates as like a number of milliseconds or seconds past 1st of January 1970, this was like some random date in August 1963 or something. There was some weird like epoch moment that they picked for this particular system.
It was somebody's birthday.
Yeah, maybe. And all of the EBCDIC ASCII couch transformations, and there's just all sorts of weird stuff. So yeah, it's fun. It's just, you know, part of the landscape they have to deal with.
Well, let's see. We got Zaffy says hello, and then remembers the Power Builder in C++ era. That's when we start to date ourselves a little bit, when we start talking about technologies of a certain era. And people are like, oh, so you're that old. Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Can't you tell?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a little bit of gray starting to show up. I don't love that, but what are you going to do, right? It beats the alternatives, man. That's getting older sucks, except for the alternatives. So, you know, what are you going to do? But let's see. Afro says, oh, okay. This isn't, we should jump into this. So I didn't know about C4 until recently. I learned it's used by Backstage. Haven't learned much about it yet. Abstraction benefits, Spotify catalog, super interesting. So this leads me to a question I already had, which is, you know, you came up with the C4 concept. When, how, what sort of drove you in that direction? I know you and I have spent a lot of time in this.
You're the origin story of the C4 now, don't you?
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, that's kind of my rote question.
About origin stories today.
It's all about it's like the Marvel universe. It's just origin stories all the way down.
Yeah. So when I worked in London, in the kind of latter half of my career, I ended up becoming kind of tech lead architect for the teams we were running, and kind of sending out to consulting companies. We were sending out as consulting companies to our customers. Right. And of course, if you work for a consulting company and you want to scale and grow a consulting company, you need more people to form more teams to service more customers.
Yep.
With more teams, you need more tech leads and architects. So during the latter half of my career, I was part of the team inside one of the consulting companies I worked for that would help train developers to kind of move into tech lead and architect roles. Myself and a bunch of colleagues used to do that internally. And we eventually took that out. That course became like a public thing. So I think the first iteration we did was like a 1-day workshop at one of the QCon conferences in London back in like, I'm going to say, I'm probably going to get the dates wrong, but I'm going to say like 2006, something like that. And we did that a few times, and we kind of did some other conference stuff as well. And eventually, I think it was Skills Matter. Do you remember Skills Matter?
Yes.
So I think it was Skills Matter back in, again, same sort of time frame, 2006, 7, 8, something like that. They approached me and wanted to run the training courses, like a 2-day kind of in-person training course through them. So I did that. And the course I used to run then is quite similar to the course I run today. I mean, nothing's really changed in the field of software architecture. People just kind of disagree more, but it's fundamentally the same thing. But we can talk about that later. Yes. But one of the exercises in the training course was like, here's some requirements. It's like a 2-page set of requirements, and it's exactly the same set of requirements I still use today. Here's 2 pages of requirements. Break yourself up into groups of like 2, 3, 4 people, go do some design and draw some pictures to somehow describe your solution, your design. The emphasis of the exercise then was to make sure people could justify their designs, and also to make sure their design satisfied things like the quality attributes. Mm-hmm. So we would go, we would do the exercises like a 60-90 minute exercise, and then we do like this round robin around the room, and everybody would present their diagrams and justify why it would be satisfactory and implement the security requirements, and et cetera, et cetera. And after a while of doing this, I realized I couldn't understand any of the diagrams anybody was producing. And I thought,
none of these are alike.
Yeah, there has to be something we can do here to improve the situation. So of course, UML's already gone out of fashion.
Right.
So I was a big UML fan. So when I graduated in '96, again,
where's your
UML
copy of
came
UML
out.
Distilled? It's got to be nearby, right? It's somewhere.
I don't have any more. So when I moved from London to Jersey, it turns out books are really heavy.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
And I kind of ditched quite a lot of books.
Okay. That's
and
fair.
It's somewhere in the UK. But ironically, UML Distilled is like the best version of a UML book that's ever existed, especially like the 1 and 1.1 versions that Martin Fowler wrote.
100%.
So yeah, I was a big fan of UML. I think fairly early on in my career, I went on a 5-day UML with Select Enterprise course, which sounds pretty bad. But it was actually quite fun because it kind of taught us how to use the tooling and how to use UML in some depth. And most of the projects I worked on between sort of end of the 90s to maybe 5 or 6 years later, we used UML pretty much extensively to diagram and document our architectures. Sure. But then, of course, Agile came along and people didn't want to use UML, et cetera, and UML usage kind of declined. So back to my workshops, we're doing these workshops and I can't understand the diagrams people are drawing. And I'm starting to see lots of people saying, well, we're doing Agile and we don't need to draw diagrams because the values in the conversation and the Agile Manifesto says we should do working software and forget about documentation, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to kind of counter all of this. Mm-hmm. So I thought, right, how can I explain to people how to draw good diagrams? So I thought, well, why don't I just teach people how I do it?
Yeah.
So after we stopped using UML, we were using tools like Visio, et cetera, et cetera. And the C4 model is essentially how I used to draw software architecture diagram. So I draw like a high-level picture, like this is the thing we're building, this is the world around it. Pinch to zoom in, this is the applications and data stores, and that is essentially the C4 model. That's the origin story. That's where it came from.
Yeah, the pinch to zoom piece. Oh gosh. So a trigger warning. Anyone remember RUP modeling? Yeah. Oh yes, very much. Zaffy's try to put some of that behind me. You know that's
I actually liked RUP.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
It's a controversial statement, I know.
It is.
Yeah, I worked on a RUP project in the early 2000s for one of the big banks in London. But we were really fortunate to have some people from Rational come and do consulting on the project. Sure, and they basically said to us, don't use all of RUP because it's way too big. Like, here are the things you should do. And if you string these things together in this order and do these artifacts, you've got a nice lightweight version of RUP. Mm-hmm. And so it actually works pretty well. I mean, the project was huge and it had other issues, but
most projects don't fail because we we chose the wrong language or we used the wrong development methodology. They usually fail
No.
because of people problems. But you've hit on a couple of things there with both of those comments. You don't have to do all of it, and we don't need to draw any pictures because we're agile. That's never what any of these processes say, and it's always fascinating to me to see how people sort of pick and choose. And I'm a big fan of agile. I've done a lot of agile work, and I do think it's the worst way to develop software except for all the other ones we tried. And maybe we'll get better at this in another 50, 100, 300 years, 1,000 years. But so many people get fixated on little parts of it, and they pull out little parts of it, and they just keep pounding on that. The Agile Manifesto doesn't say, don't ever write anything down except code. It gets interpreted that way by some people who just want a cowboy program, and I get that. There's nothing inherent about Agile that says you can't do or shouldn't do any architecture.
No,
it's interesting to see how often people.
It's all a big misinterpretation.
Exactly. And the thing that I look at with architectural artifacts writ large, you don't need necessarily to draw all these pictures, but boy, it sure helps to have a conversation around an artifact as opposed to vague generalities and hand waving. And I've seen in many instances where we've used some kind of a diagram or some similar thing, it's helped kind of center that conversation or given us something around which to have the conversation. I think that's one of those underutilized benefits or underappreciated benefits of some of these artifacts.
Yeah, totally. It's kind of a little bit more nuanced than that as well, of course, because even if a team does draw a picture on a whiteboard, if that picture has some degree of ambiguity in it, so if you don't name things properly or you're not explicit about what the abstractions represent, like what the boxes represent, it's very easy for multiple people looking at that diagram to interpret it through their own eyes.
Right.
And so I see this on my workshops all the time. You'll get a group of people and they'll be sketching out a bunch of boxes. So the case study is a financial risk system. So basically this thing takes in two data sources, imports some data, runs some risk calculations, generates a report. So the boxes on the diagrams represent data import, logging, audit, risk calculation, report generation, standard sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But sometimes I see people discussing these diagrams, and one person in the group will think this is a monolithic architecture, like it's a single Spring Boot app or something.
Yep.
And someone else on the same group will say, no, I thought we were designing a bunch of separate microservices. Yep. And they've all interpreted the boxes in a totally different way, but they've not had that discussion.
Right.
And that's why I always pick up on people saying, well, the value's in the conversation. I agree there's a lot of benefit to having a conversation around a shared artifact. But if everybody has a different idea of what that shared artifact is, the value is not in the conversation because you're having the wrong discussion.
Right. Yeah. Zafy says it's important to have that same domain-specific language terminology. I'm very much of the opinion that a glossary is an incredibly underrated artifact on most projects. But to your point, it's like that meta model underneath that model. And you see a box and think monolith, and someone else sees a box and thinks microservice. Well, we probably need to have that discussion at some point. I know Michael Nygaard actually tweeted that out at some point, like last year, year before. He's like, listen, if you don't have like a key on here, and I know you actually tweeted something too about around that same kind of vein. And I've used both of your tweets and some of my stuff where it's like, hey, if people don't understand what you're saying, okay, you did something wrong there, so make sure people know what you mean by this shape versus that shape, and et cetera.
And really, when you break the C4 model down, it's two things in essence. Number one is a set of named abstractions at different levels of detail. So software systems, containers, not Docker, components and code. And don't ask. And it's 4 levels of diagram that map onto those 4 levels of abstraction. And that's essentially the C4 model. Sure, there's some guidelines around diagram keys and notation, et cetera, but essentially C4 is abstractions and diagram types. And once you apply that to a diagram, you now have a common glossary, a common set of terminology, et cetera. So that really helps avoid those, like, I thought this was a monolith, not a set of microservices type discussions.
Yeah, no, that's a huge point. Having that I mean, it's just like definitions of some of these words. I remember Stein and I chatting about this once, and he said, your actual definition of a microservice doesn't really matter as long as when you discuss microservices inside the walls of your company, everybody agrees on what that means, and we're not talking past each other. And that does seem to be one of the most endemic things in software. I know Rich Hickey's got a great quote along that lines, that so many of the problems in software are problems of misconception. And it's just, we don't take the time. And my wife's a business analyst, so she'd echo this as well. We don't take the time to actually understand what's the real ask here. It's just, go build us some software. Cool. What do you want that software to do? Stuff. It should work like the old system, only better.
Yeah.
Cool. That's super easy to do.
Plus, no one reads anything anymore.
No. Oh no. That is the bane of my wife's existence. They write.
It's the bane of my existence at the moment.
I mean, I think it's I don't know. Maybe it's just the kids these days. We just don't have the attention span anymore because everything's supposed to be tweet sized or shorter, and anything more than that, we don't have time. I don't know, but yeah, it is amazing how often somebody will write it down like, no, this is what it should do, and you're like, oh, well, why didn't you do it this way? It's pretty clear, like right here. It says this is what you should do, and you didn't do that. Like, why not? It's a mystery. I guess we all act like teenagers.
Yeah.
That goes back to the pre-show. We were discussing the joy of parenting and how much fun that is, and all the good times that come along with the role of parent. So, interesting. So Aphel says, oh yeah, reading books. I could never keep up with carrying a tablet, a Samsung phone that folds open. Yeah. I have not read a physical book in longer than I care to admit. Although I've discovered my teenager does not like reading on a tablet. So I keep recommending these books to him. He's like, well, do we have it in physical form? I'm like, no. He's like, well, I'm not reading it then.
That's really interesting.
You're a digital native. You watch movies you watch video on I shouldn't say movies. He watches YouTube videos on his phone while he plays video games. So why don't you want to read?
Mine do exactly the same.
Do you have any understanding of that?
No.
Honestly?
No. I'm like, where's all my bandwidth going? Oh,
exactly. Oh, I can tell you. Yeah, I can tell you where it's going. Yeah, there were times during the pandemic where I had to explicitly say to the child, please do not play games right now. I have work. I need you to not be taking any of my bandwidth away. Yeah. Thank you.
Or at least turn YouTube off whilst you're playing a game.
Yeah, exactly. I that's the one I don't understand. I get if you're watching an explainer about how to pass a board or get past a boss or something, I totally understand. Been there, done that. But it's the watching unrelated or I should say listening, because I don't really think he's looking at it. Listening to unrelated content while playing a game. I'm like, okay. Do you just want to listen to some music, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know. But
says my youngest being told off for screaming while playing Fortnite again. He's kind of singing it to himself.
Thumbs up. I love it.
He was probably watching YouTube as well.
Probably. Yeah. The one nice thing is now that we're back in session, I don't have to worry about that as much because my kid's back in school. So he's not slurping down my bandwidth. He's going after the school's bandwidth, which is fine. We pay enough for it, so it should all work out. But now you didn't just create a model. You actually built a tool to help people with this. Tell me more about the genesis behind it. I mean, that's a pretty big undertaking to just say, and then I'm going to build a tool for doing this.
Yeah. Would you like the origin story?
Yes, I would. You're catching on, man. I don't have a lot of tools in the toolkit. I just keep going back to the same old tropes.
It works. So after figuring out a way to get people to draw diagrams that vaguely look similar and that I could understand, I started doing more training courses and doing training courses for organizations kind of directly. And that was all good for a few years. But one of the recurring questions I got was like, what tool do you recommend? And back in like 2010, 2012, maybe, my answer was, well, all these diagrams, they're just boxes and arrows with some text in, so you can just use Visio or PowerPoint, which kind of pains me a little bit. But it was kind of, you can use any tool that you want to. The C4 model doesn't prescribe any notation or any tooling, so knock yourself out. And after recommending people use Visio a bunch of times, that sort of started to grate on me. So I kind of sat down and thought, well, what sort of tooling would I like to build? And one of the biggest problems with having a hierarchical set of diagrams is if you draw a top level context diagram in C4, you have a bunch of software systems and people, users, that sort of thing. When you zoom in to level 2 to draw the container diagram, which shows you the internals of the system that you're describing, you need to have the same people and external software systems on your diagram because you're telling a more detailed version of the same story. If you're using paper, if you're using Visio, if you're using PowerPoint, you have to start copy pasting people and software systems in order to get that consistency of story. If you rename a person or a software system on one diagram, you have to rename it on the others. Otherwise, your diagrams now become out of sync.
Are you saying copy and paste has problems? Wait a minute. Hang on.
Yes. Do not repeat yourself. Don't repeat yourself. It's a thing we always talk about in software development. But we see this all the time with diagramming, like architecture diagramming, and particularly with the C4 model. So I quickly realized the type of tooling I wanted to build was something model-based. Now, the problem with saying model-based is that people instantly switch off. They're like, no, not interested. But I realized that we needed something model-based if we were to solve a bunch of the issues that people had with diagramming.
Right.
And that's really why I started building some tooling. I'm like, how can I build some tooling that would be easy to use, that would be something that I wanted to use, and that would fix this problem. So the first version of my tooling, which no one has ever seen because it was absolutely terrible. So I built a Java Spring web app with a HTML front end. And what you do is you boot this web app up and you get a nice big HTML form where you start entering all of your people and all of your software systems, and you start defining links between people and software systems in this really horrendous, like 1990 style HTML form. And I realized that it was just never going to scale past like 3 boxes in 2 hours or something. And so I quickly canned that UI. That's why nobody has thankfully seen it. But what was really interesting to me is the code on the server, the Java code sitting on the server, was actually a bunch of Java classes that represented people, software systems, containers, components, and links between them. And so I thought, well, hang on a second. The C4 model is targeted at developers. It turns out that having a bunch of Java classes is a really nice way to build an in-memory object model that represents the same things that end up on a diagram. And that's really where my Structurizr tooling came from. So I think back in 2014, the initial version was kind of put out there. And it consisted of 2 parts. There was an open source Java client library where you'd basically write like a public static void main Java app. And you would craft up some code to create people and software system objects and kind of wire them together. And then you would serialize that to a JSON document because, why not? And then you would use a web API to send it up to my my web-based tooling, which basically had no UI apart from a diagram viewer. So you would define your objects, which represented your elements and relationships. You would define a bunch of views onto those things, and your views get translated to diagrams. And that's essentially where the first version of the tooling came from.
Nice. Yeah, I echo your sentiment that having tried nearly every enterprisey modeling tool in existence, my biggest issue was the learning curve. And while they certainly made some diagrams simpler or easier, it also made it others far more complicated than it had to be. And the analogy I always like to use is, I'm old enough to remember when we used to do page layout with tables. And then when CSS finally started to kind of mature, there was this idea of, well, you should probably just be doing this with CSS. And somebody with a good sense of humor put out a website that said, should I use tables? And then you pressed a button and it was a 45-minute countdown. And at the end of 45 minutes, it would say, did you get it to work in CSS? No, then use tables.
Nice.
And I kind of feel the same way about most enterprising modeling tools, that if you can get over the learning curve, and certain projects require it because they're so big and they have so many moving parts, like we've all got to be on the same tooling, and I totally understand that. but for so many of the things that we do as tech leads, developers, architects, whiteboard's pretty darn good. Miro's fine. Totally. OmniGraffle's fine. Visio's fine. You know, you got to focus on the message, not on fighting with a tool. And that's certainly one of the things that I've appreciated about Structurizr is it seems to have a lower learning curve, at least from a technical perspective. I mean, maybe for a non-technical user, that's probably not accurate, but you know, that's fine.
Yeah. So with regards to the actual diagrams, I wanted to build a visualization engine that would kind of just work, and I wouldn't need to mess around with like text alignment and font size, because you know, if you look at all of the example C4 diagrams, you've got a box, you've got like the name of the thing and the type of the thing and a bunch of descriptive text. In tools like Visio, you've got to type all that text into the box and then start playing with different font sizes and bolding and centering the text. And I just wanted to kind of feed it a bunch of information and then just render it in a set way. And I guess that's one of the downsides with the rendering engine. It does things in a very set way. There's a little bit of customizability around different shapes and different colors and different font sizes, but fundamentally the layout of the internals of the element are kind of taken care of for you. And I really like that, because the only thing I want to do with the diagramming tool is move boxes. I don't really care what the boxes, you know, how the boxes are organized inside. I just want them to look fairly nice. And my biggest job is I want to move boxes around to help tell a story. So, you know, users at the top, data stores at the bottom, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that's why I chose that very kind of constrained rendering type approach.
Yeah.
Which some people like.
Well, I see that frankly as a positive, because you know, I'm a fan of constraints shall set you free, and it's one less thing that you then have to worry about.
Yeah.
I think most of us, if we're really honest, the amount of time that we've spent aligning things and making sure everything was 90 degrees and that there were no overlapping lines was not worth the amount of effort and time in terms of what it then allowed us to communicate.
Yeah,
and so,
because then you change one word and your alignment's out.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Oh, come on, really?
Exactly. And then you spend another half an hour.
And then you adjust the size of one box, and now it's different to all the other boxes. Now you think, well, should all the other boxes be the same size as well?
See, and like most software people, I'm so darn anal retentive that then I'm like, well, no, I got to go redo all these. They all got to be the same size, or else
someone else will point it out.
Well, this box might mean something different because it's a different size, right? I mean, that must be a monolith because it's bigger, or who the heck knows?
Or just more important.
Or it's just more important. Exactly. You know, it's amazing the kind of things that we will fixate on as a developer species. So yeah. Yeah, no, I'm with you 100% on that. I have spent more hours than I care to admit fighting with tools and getting very anal retentive about alignment, and it's misspent youth as a UI designer, I guess, is the moral of that story. But so Zafy's had a good recommendation for dealing with teenagers on your network is you just segment them off so that you prioritize work traffic. Maybe I need to try that. Maybe I need to make a new network segment just for my child to be on YouTube.
We had we set up a separate wireless network, which is also time limited. That also works. It was time limited and bandwidth limited.
Nice.
Yeah.
I have.
Why are my downloads slow? I don't know.
I have no idea. Couldn't explain it to you. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. I have set up various limits on my son's phone, and every so often I get the pushback on that. And can you please approve this? Can you give me more time? And it's like, yeah, I suppose, but there are reasons why, you know, that thing's locked down from, you know, 10:30 to 7 in the morning or whatever it is. Like, I really would like you to sleep. You know, that's kind of an important thing for the younglings. But fascinating. So when you're not teaching people how to do this, when you're not consulting, like what do you do for fun? And what are your hobbies? What interests you outside of staring at screens?
So I mean, it's very weather dependent, but surfing mostly.
Now, my buddy Jakob does kite surfing, and I think that's kind of crazy. How in of all places on earth, how did you get into surfing in the UK? It doesn't seem like a surfing hotbed.
Would you like the origin story?
You're catching on to the whole point. So Simon, the whole reason I even started this Twitch stream concept was I missed running into you and my friends at events, and then just kind of, you know, chatting for some period of time, and I've always been amazed at the the winding conversations that I've gotten involved with. And so I really missed seeing people and hanging out with people. And so, it's been a little better. I mean, I've crossed paths a few times this year, not as many as I would have liked. I'm still amazed you. How did we
missed
not
each other in Barcelona, didn't we?
In Barcelona, we were like two ships passing in the middle of the night, and you made reference to coffee, and then I never learned where that coffee place was.
Oh well.
But yes, I do have a coffee question for you. Sure. But so how did you get into surfing of all things?
So it's a very simple story. So my wife bought us a family surfing lesson.
Okay.
In 2013, 2014. And that was it. Yeah. It was like an hour and a half lesson. It was like the toughest thing I've ever done. It was so tiring.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, it was, and that was it.
Now, have you ventured to like Nazare? Have you tried to surf those monster waves?
Looks very dangerous. My ideal wave is like 2-3 foot waist high.
There you go. There you go. I actually watched
anything over my head is nope.
No. I watched that documentary on HBO on, I think it was called The 100-Foot Wave or something like that. And I do not.
That place is terrifying, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
Especially for those jet skiers who have to go in afterwards.
I can't understand why anybody would want to venture into that, especially when you've seen the injuries that have happened. And, you start to kind of put two and two together and go, you could get hurt very, very badly. You could get killed in this. And people are like, man, that's what I'm going for. Like, okay. I mean, it's like that free solo person. They definitely have a little different amygdala than I do, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Totally.
All right. Well, please stay away from Nazare then. I don't want to. I don't want to get that tweet. I don't want to get that news where we have sad news about poor Simon today. But no, I do have to touch on coffee because I know you and I are both big fans of coffee. How's your coffee art coming? I was very impressed with what you were able to do during the pandemic with your latte art. Have you just perfected it to this point? Are you doing swans? I mean, what how's that going for you?
No swans. Heart and tulips.
Okay.
No swans, nothing more fancier.
Now, how did you start doing that? Was it just, I'm making a latte anyway, so I'm going to give it a try? Were there some YouTube videos that helped you with that? Because I've tried. Matthew McCullough attempted to teach me how to do it, and it just didn't take.
So we bought an espresso machine towards the end of the pandemic. I'm going to say sometime last year or maybe end of 2020 actually.
Okay.
And it was Sage, which is Breville in the US, Barista Express. It's like they're pretty much entry level inbuilt grinder, everything. And once you've got an espresso machine and you can steam milk, you're like, well, why not? So I basically taught myself. I think it took about a month of doing 2 or 4 coffees a day to make something resembling a heart. And just kind of went from there, really.
See,
it's actually relatively easy.
Okay. I mean, the best part is you just get to drink your failures, right? And it's just I got to make another cup of coffee because I got to practice.
And no one sees them anyway, so it's fine.
Right.
Yeah, it's relatively straightforward. The trick is really getting the steaming right.
Sure.
If you don't get steaming right, it's just impossible.
Got to get just the right kind of bubbles in there, and on more than one occasion, I have gotten a flat white or a latte and actually felt bad about drinking it because the art was so nice, and I'm like, I am so sorry that I'm just going to drink exactly. Work.
Take a photo first and then drink it.
I do. I really do, because I'm like, I don't know how you did that, and kudos to you and thank you, and I appreciate your effort that I'm literally just going to now drink and no one ever else sees, except for the picture that I took and then use on a talk or something. But all right, well, now you've inspired me. Maybe I need to give that another go round.
It's been kind of interesting because we upgraded the machine earlier this year to something much more powerful, and now we can do enough milk for 2 drinks at once, which throws its own complications into the equation because of course at the top it's very foamy, at the bottom it's not foamy, so you have to start learning how to like split the jug properly and things. So it's like a whole world out there.
Did you discover? I mean, for me, when I got into the whole at-home espresso thing, it was kind of like bikes. When I first bought a bike, I had no concept of how much money you can spend on a bike and how quickly you can go from $1,000, $1,500 to $16,000 and not even bat an eyelash. And I didn't realize when I first got into at-home coffee that not only is the espresso machine itself not cheap, we got to have a good grinder. You know, I mean, you probably got to spend, I mean, some people will tell you if you're not spending $3,000 on your grinder, you did it wrong. And they start to go, wow, you can spend a lot of money really fast.
Yeah.
And does it taste a lot different? But it becomes a rabbit hole, doesn't it? I mean, you can, and that's before we get into, and then I bought some beans.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we bought the machine we did initially, because having come from basically an espresso capsule machine, it's like, well, the entry level espresso machine is like £500. What's that, $700? Right. What am I getting for that? And what makes one that's 10 times the price better? So yeah, it's a learning curve.
Oh, it absolutely is. Absolutely is.
But we've stopped.
Okay.
We have a decent setup, but it's not a crazy setup by any standards.
Well, and you and I both have friends that have what would qualify as crazy setups, and I know there's at least one that I've contemplated. Except the people I know that have one say, yeah, no, it's broken more often than it works. I'm like, that's not a good attribute for
no.
your daily coffee habit.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to have to spend as much money fixing it as I did buying it. Like, that doesn't seem quite right.
That's the thing. Some of them are essentially mini commercial machines, which means you need commercial maintenance, etc., etc., and you have to put the right water in them. And that's way too much for me.
Yeah, I don't think we appreciate just how much effort goes into maintaining these high end barista machines that we see at our favorite coffee shops. But good times. Now
I no longer have a favorite coffee shop, though. That's the only problem.
Oh, interesting. Because I definitely have a few, and I have a few in London itself. Okay, so now it's
all very hit and miss, though. Now,
has it ruined you for other coffee?
Totally.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I know it's certainly made me snobbier about my coffee for sure when I'm pulling it myself. Like, I used to think I didn't like lattes, and then what I realized is I just didn't like the espresso that was used in the latte I was getting. And then once you start getting really good beans, and then you're like, actually, I really like lattes. You know, I really like flat whites. So yeah, I know what you mean, and it is certainly one of my missions in life. Anytime I'm traveling, to try to get my hands on as good a coffee as possible while I'm on the road, and that, to your point, that can be a hit or miss experience.
Yeah, totally. When I was dropping my oldest son off in the UK this weekend, I went to a little espresso shop around the corner from the hotel we were staying at.
Yeah,
and it was amazing. It was one of the best coffees I've had all year, and had a really good chat with the guy. And he was telling me he's just ordered some beans from Sweden, and with postage to the UK. So 2 bags of beans with postage to the UK, £45. 2 bags, just regular bags.
Just 2 bags.
250 grams.
I was going to say,
it's
probably
some like super
grams.
Rare specialty coffee or something.
Yeah,
but he was well into it.
There is a very, very good roaster in Oslo that I'm blanking on the name of right now as I think about it, but there is a high end roaster that I have frequented. I know the first time I went there, they kept basically just serving me things, and I got to try some cold brew that was one of the most complex things I've ever tasted. I didn't sleep well that night, be the place where to put it, because I had so much caffeine when I was there. But I ferried as many bags home as I could afford, and enjoyed the heck out of it. So I wish I'd gotten a good excuse to be back in Oslo this year so I could have loaded up again. But yeah. But see, then you can get snobby about your beans, right? I mean, you can start trying to explore all the, sort of boutique roasters out there, and that's fun in my experience.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
It can be a little annoying when
you
got to keep adjusting the grind and trying to get it right, and then you're bummed because I just pulled a shot I got to throw away because it wasn't right. Like, that just cost me.
I pretty much drink everything.
Yeah,
it's really bad.
Well, that's where I get like, if I don't get it right and it's too, like, I can't get the pressure where I want it, and it just kind of like gushes out, like, that's not going to be very good. Or the opposite direction where you get like 3 drops out, you're like, oh, that's not going to be any good. Like if it's in between, I'll choke it down. But that's always half the fun, to say the least. So what when I think of Jersey, I always think of course, New Jersey, because we were very good at naming things by just putting new on something from the old country. I also think of cows. Is that a real thing? Did the cows come from Jersey? Is that what we call them, jerseys? Or and did a bunch of people come from Jersey and land in the East Coast and went, we're just going to call this New Jersey? Like, how did that all work out?
So the origin story of this, and you're going to have to look up the exact history because this is not my strong point. But essentially, so given where Jersey is, it's between the UK and France, and it's been fought over like all the time. So
Sure.
you can trace these battles back like hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think at some point, again, I'm likely going to get this wrong, but I think at some point Jersey was part of France.
Okay.
And then some high-ranking English officer got captured, and I think there was some deal done. It's like, well, if we can get him back, then we'll do some deal, and essentially, that guy was gifted, or some guy was gifted the land which is now New Jersey. Wikipedia probably has the accurate story, but it's something like that. It's basically some high-ranking officer was gifted the land, and he named it New Jersey.
There you go. Fascinating. Oh, we got a question here from Zaffies. Did you do all of that solo? I think by all of that they mean C4, Structurizr, etc. Or did you have a team of folks working on your behalf?
No, it's just me, because I can't surf all the time because the weather's not.
See, now that's
sufficient for surfing all the time.
That's what you need to get to, right? Is you need to have a staff so that you can take important meetings while surfing, and then just focus on the things that you really love to do. So yeah, that's that passive income is a really cool thing if you can find it. But well, that's fascinating. All right. Do you have a favorite place? I bring up surfing again. Do you have like a favorite place to go? Do you just surf near where you are? Is there? I mean, I know there's definitely some surfing in the UK. I mean, that was part of that Nazare documentary, because some of those guys were both UK and Ireland.
Jersey's only 9 miles by 5 miles, so it's not particularly big, and we're kind of surrounded by ocean. But that said, our predominant swell is from the west, so our west coast faces the Atlantic.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of the primary surfing spot.
Sure.
But of course, it depends on the wind direction, and generally the surf is smaller in the summer and larger in the winter, just because, of course, all the hurricanes and cyclones and stuff that happens in the Atlantic pushes the swell. So in the winter, if it's kind of too big and horrible on the west coast, it's still not going to be Nazare big, of course. But if it's too big and horrible on the west coast, we've got some other spots on the north and the south coast which will work, because the swell kind of wraps around if it's really big. So yeah, a variety of spots, but in the summer mostly on the west coast.
Okay. Now, is there a large surfing community, or is it everybody knows everybody?
There is now, because of COVID, no one could go on holidays. And so I think everybody went out and bought surfboards and got surfing lessons and bought wetsuits. And now you can't buy wetsuits anywhere. There's like a shortage of wetsuits for some reason.
Really?
And I think that reason is COVID. Yeah, so there's like tons more people surfing these days. And in years gone past, because I'm self-employed and I get to travel for workshops.
Yeah.
When I'm not doing that, I'm kind of doing the Structurizr stuff.
Right.
Because I'm self-employed, I used to go surfing at like in the middle of the day. And pre-COVID, you used to see like all of the retired people and the people on shift work, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's like tons of people surfing in the middle of the day, and we're like, has nobody got any work to go to anymore? It turns out they're all working from home and just like ditching meetings and going surfing and stuff.
Right. Well, I mean, to be fair, that's one of the things I absolutely adore about my job, and one of the things that I really appreciate about the last couple of years is, and I think this is one of the things people like about work from home, is that flexibility over their schedule. I certainly have spent countless times in the office looking busy because, well, I can't leave yet, but I don't really have anything to do. And, it was just so annoying. Or you're just in a situation where it's not practical well, I'm going to go play 9 holes and come back like that. I'm not going to come back to the office after that. Whereas now it's not that big a deal. You just, I'm going to go for a walk for an hour, and then I'll do a load of laundry, and then I'll hop on that Zoom call. And, I think ultimately that leads to a better quality of life.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I guess it's especially easy here because even though I live almost as far away as you can possibly get from the West Coast, we're still a 20-minute drive.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely helps. Speaking of the pandemic, were there any like habits or things you picked up during COVID that you're hoping you can continue? I mean, I guess we're kind of in a new normal. I don't really know what that looks like yet, and who knows what the fall is going to hold here with resurging cases potentially. But anything you picked up that you want to keep doing?
Making coffee.
There you go. Good answer. Good answer. Yeah, no, I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah. No, not really. It's pretty much got back to normal.
Okay.
Aside from all of the chaos around London Heathrow Airport and British Airways. Oh, man. Both those two things are a disaster at the moment. It was fine at the start of the year.
Yeah.
So travel, when Omicron hit end of last year, it took a few months. Like I think March this year is when I first got to travel again. Mm-hmm. And from March until about June time, traveling was absolutely fine. There were few people traveling. Everything was on time, no queues for anything. And then something happened in June and it's just terrible now.
Yeah.
Every single one of my flights on recent trips has been delayed or canceled, rebooked, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I can echo that sentiment. It seemed like things were going pretty good there for a little while. And then as demand really started to ramp up, the system couldn't handle it. And, it seems to be a combination of staffing changes during the pandemic that they haven't been able to get people back or hire new people, along with just other snafus. But yeah, I totally agree. I've been on a lot of flights where you're like, well, I sure hope we take off soon because I've got a connecting flight that I'd really like to make. I don't really want to spend the night in Amsterdam if I don't have to. Thank you. But yeah, I'm hopeful that that's going to get cleaned up, worked out. But, these supply chain issues, you ask about like wetsuits, can't buy a wetsuit. That's one of several examples. I know last year I tried to get something fixed on one of my bikes, and it's like, well, hopefully we can get the part. I'm like, what do you mean, hopefully? This is like a chain. This isn't some complicated thing here. Like, oh, yeah, it's taken us about 180 days.
Cycling, didn't they?
Right. Yeah. Anything outdoors became something everybody wanted to do. And on the one hand, it's great because I've seen a resurgence in people interested in golf. So, a lot of golf courses, at least here in the US, are super healthy, which is awesome. But then it's also, wait, what do you mean I can't get a tee time? Oh, we're full. Oh, okay. I guess I'll play next week. Cool. So trade-offs to say the least.
Yeah.
So you and I both get to go to lots of cool places. Do you have any spot that you just love to go to that you can't wait to get back to, that you try to even plan your schedule around? Boy, I'm going to try to get there once or twice this year.
Not really. I mean, I guess it just really depends what comes up.
Sure.
Especially with conferences, but most of my trips are actually doing workshops for organizations. Okay. So really that just depends, where they're based. So
sure,
my travel patterns tend to be very unpredictable. Sorry.
Right.
I mean, most of my stuff is Europe anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, places like Australia, always good to go to.
Oh man, yeah, that's good times. Other than the getting there part,
it's quite a long way. Yeah,
it's a long way from everywhere. It's a long way from New Zealand. I mean, it is a hike, but it's
just kind of fun to go to new places. So I'm hopefully going to Croatia, which is a place I've not been to before. I've been to like half the countries in Europe, but never been to Croatia. So that should be fun.
I actually had a brush with the Croatian water polo team. I was doing an event in Italy with Jakob, and I'm in the elevator in the hotel, and there's all these very tall, very fit men, and I make this crack about I'm not used to being the smallest person in an elevator because these guys were all 3, 4, 5 inches taller than me, and they all kind of laughed, and I said, so I've seen you guys around, like what you do and who are you? And they're like, oh, we're the Croatian national water polo team. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, that explains several things. But yeah, I thought that was very random that they would be at this particular hotel and doing whatever they were doing. I have no idea. I assume they were playing some friendlies or something. I don't know. They weren't real big on details, but such is life. So, well, that'll be fun.
Yeah. Yes, I have a bunch of other trips planned already for the rest of this year. I'm going to Sweden next week.
Heck yeah.
Off to Devox in Antwerp, Devox Belgium in
Nice.
Antwerp. And then Copenhagen.
Okay.
And then just outside Amsterdam.
Nice.
And then Stockholm again. And then, a few other places. Edinburgh.
I'm jealous. A little easier for you though. Those are a little longer trips for me.
Yeah,
across
totally.
the pond. It definitely adds some clock. I was very jealous of one of my friends when they're like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm just going to fly back tonight." I'm like, "Oh yeah, you can do that." Yeah, I can't.
Yeah, I mean that's generally hard for me to do because most places are 2 flights for me, so
Right.
I have to go through Heathrow first. So yeah, even just like flying home one night is generally not possible.
Right.
Unless it's London.
Right. Yeah. Then you're all right. Yeah. Assuming, of course, there aren't other delays, cancellations, etc. I that'll eventually get itself worked out. I hope.
I think so.
Fingers crossed.
A lot of it's staffing. It's lack of staff. Of course, we've got Brexit as well, so companies can't get. They can't. The pool's smaller. The pool of potential employees is smaller. And I think one of the other big problems is with the airline industry, getting security clearance is taking a long time. So there's a bunch of people who want to work, but if they can't get security clearance, they actually can't do that.
Right.
So there's a process there as well. But yeah, and it'll get sorted out at some point.
I think we all hope they take their time on the security clearance part, right? We'd really like them to ask whatever questions they need to ask before they grant someone access to the airfield.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Just like I'm okay with, I was on one flight where they had some kind of mechanical issue and we had to pull back into the gate so they could do some paperwork and whatnot. And I'm like, take your time. You do a good job.
That's happened to me a bunch of times this year. Once was the cooling system for the routing computer was failing, which I thought was quite bad. My wife had one. Yeah, exactly. My wife had one where I think the brakes weren't working properly. The biggest delay I had was sitting on the airplane at Jersey Airport, and we pushed back from the gate like 2 meters and then pushed back onto the gate 2 meters. I'm like, well, this is not how this is supposed to work. And it turns out that one of the wheels under the body, so not the little front wheel, but like the proper big wheels, was bulging out on the tires. And you can't just like flip the tire off and put a new tire on. You've got to replace the whole unit. And it turns out they had a whole unit in Jersey.
Wow.
So that took 2 hours to fix.
I was going to say that's probably a deplaning scenario too. They don't want all the people on board while they, jack the thing up and pop it off and put on the new one. Yeah.
So that was quite impressive that they managed to change a wheel on an aircraft in Jersey.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point because I've certainly been to a few of the smaller airports that Delta services, and you're always kind of nervous about, boy, if there's a problem here, if there's a problem in Minneapolis or Atlanta or Detroit, like, it's fine. Seattle, those are hubs. It'll all work itself out. But when it's not one of those hubs, you're like, boy, I sure hope this isn't an all-day deal because it could be real fast. There's not another flight in an hour like there is if you're going from Minneapolis to Atlanta or something. But good times. So do you have any books or movie or show recommendations? Anything that you found particularly enjoyable over the last couple of years?
Gosh,
have you watched Ted Lasso? I always have
no.
That's
Apple TV, isn't it?
Yes. No. I will ship you an Apple TV so you can watch Ted Lasso.
Oh, we have an Apple TV. I just don't have the Apple TV subscription thing.
Then I would argue it is worth doing that even just for a month to watch Ted Lasso 3 times. I genuinely believe that, Simon. It is.
We had the subscription when the box was new, but then we it elapsed and we never renewed it.
Okay, I believe. anytime you get a new iDevice, I think they pretty much just toss in a year.
Yeah, it's like 6 months or 3 months of something in there.
Something.
What have I watched recently? I've watched The Mandalorian and
Yeah.
nearly done with the Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah, yeah. What did you think of Mando?
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's I think you're not the only one who had issues with Apple TV in terms of the Apple TV Plus thing.
Yeah.
The whole Baby Yoda thing to me was
It's just such
stunning.
a weird but fantastic
Right.
storyline. Yeah,
just perfect, and that whole interaction,
unusual combination.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't know how they kept that under wraps. How they hid Baby Yoda until, and I know he's got a real name, that's fine, but he's forever going to be Baby Yoda, or she. I guess I don't know. Do we know if that thing is a boy or girl? I don't know, but it just blew me out of the water. I'm like, holy crap, that's amazing. That's just amazing. So yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. And a surprising amount of the Boba Fett series is really just Mandalorian again, which is fine with me. I don't object to that at all. So, okay, I see that. So Atwell said they didn't have current payment information, tried to update it. Yeah. There's a certain point where okay, I give up. Try to make this as easy as possible for me. So okay, are you? I think is it this weekend or next weekend? The Andor series comes out. Are you looking forward to that one? You think that's going to be on your consumer list?
I haven't seen that actually.
So that's like the prequel to Rogue One.
I saw a screenshot of what's the actor's name who's in Rogue One?
Oh God, I can see his face. I just watched a trailer like thing for it last week.
Yeah, what's his character name? And anyway, yeah, I saw his face on an image. So yeah, maybe that's what it was for.
Okay.
I didn't pay much attention because I was kind of busy doing something else at the time. But yeah. Well, that's on the list then, isn't it?
It should be. It looks, at least the prequel-y stuff I watched, their long trailer, I guess you'd call it, looks really interesting. And I genuinely appreciate that we have new ways of telling these stories. It isn't just a movie or just a 24 episode arc. Yeah. I like these little one-off 6 shows here, 8 shows there. I mean, it really is an interesting way of telling that story, expanding that universe. Did you watch the Obi-Wan stories at all?
No, not yet. That's next after finish this one.
Yep, definitely. Let me know how you like that.
I tend to watch them when I'm traveling because they're like nice little 35 to an hour kind of slots, and that generally is how long my flights are anyway.
Right, works really well on an iPad too. It's good sized content for those kind of things. I totally understand. Oh, that's very cool. Are you into the Marvel universe at all? As long as we're talking about Disney Plus. Okay. Yep. Okay. Did you watch the whole WandaVision pieces?
I haven't seen WandaVision.
That one's
seen some of the other ones.
Stunningly good. I really enjoyed WandaVision. How about the Winter Soldier, the Captain America Winter Soldier stand one? That was pretty interesting. Yeah. Again, I just really appreciate how they're essentially giving us big movies, only we spread them across 7 or 8 episodes. But if you look at the actual runtime, you're like, that's kind of like 2.5 movies. Like, oh, that's pretty cool. And they don't seem to be constrained by budget, which is kind of nice. So
have you seen the second Doctor Strange?
Yes. Still kind of probably need to see it a couple times before I really understand it. It feels kind of like Memento that way, where you're like, okay, I think I understood what just went on, but we've introduced some new characters now, and where's that going to go? How's that going to work?
I think with the first one, you watched it the first time and thought that was amazing. The second one, well, I'm not quite sure actually. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it needs another watch.
Sometimes I feel like the middle parts of the stories can be challenging, especially if you know where the story has to go. I do feel like that was the real challenge for the prequels to Star Wars, that we all knew where this had to end. And so it was really hard, I think, for that to be as good as we all wanted it to be. And other than the real origin of, so how did the whole Obi-Wan Anakin thing break down? That was cool. But a lot of other stuff, you're like, I don't know that this added a whole lot to the story. Although,
Jar Jar Binks.
We could spend more time than we care to on that one. Interestingly enough, I think some of the animated stuff was far more interesting and valuable to the arc and the storyline. But I believe we're going to get an Ahsoka show as well, which when she showed up in Mando, I'm like, oh, now that's cool. This opens up a whole new set of possibilities.
Yeah, there are lots of stories you can see branching off from even these smaller series.
Right. And I do think that's going to be for those of us who grew up with this stuff. And I still distinctly remember the feeling of asking, well, when is the next one coming out after watching Empire and being told it was, I don't know, whatever year it was. And just my little, however old I was, 5, 6 years old, just being crushed by like, oh my God, it's going to be that long. That's like half my lifetime. So
yeah.
To be our age now and have this whole like plethora of options in this space, it's like, my 6-year-old, 10-year-old self would have exploded. So
yeah. And that's why I'm savoring these things for flights and not just binge watching all in one go. Yeah, just in case there's another pandemic as well, of course.
It's a great point. You got to kind of save it up, dole it out. You don't want to eat it all at once because then it's going to be gone, and then you're going to be like, when's the next one? And there's another series that I had to hold off on because I'm like, Everett, let's wait until all the episodes are out so we can kind of watch it all the way through instead of, oh, we got to the end and now we got to wait 2 weeks. Oh, bummer. But anyway. Well, as usual, our conversation went in directions I was not anticipating. I've got nothing in my notes about, and then we talk about Star Wars. So I appreciate you chatting about that with me. I do genuinely hope our paths cross sometime soon here, my friend. I'm trying to think when that might happen, but we'll always have 2023, I suppose, if it comes to that. I'm quite confident that we'll be in the same meet space at some point coming up here. So I do appreciate hanging out with me. I've got the one and only Cote next week. So best radio voice in all of tech podcasting, as far as I'm concerned. My friend, my colleague, Cote. Every so often I have to remind myself that it's not rude to call him by his last name because that's what he wants to be called. And it's just a little strange. And I'm on a Zoom call and I see his first name and I'm like, wait, who's this? Oh, that's right. It's just Cote. So anyway, well, thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I enjoyed this.
Nice to chat.
I'm glad we could hang out on a random Monday, and I'm delighted we got that scheduled. And like I say, I look forward to being in the same meet space here in the near future.
Yeah.
So you have a good evening, and I hope you get to do some surfing this week.
Hopefully Wednesday and Thursday.
There you go.
Yeah. Looks perfect.
Awesome. The system works. Well, hopefully I get to play some golf this week, and then we'll both get to do the things we really love to do. All right. Well, thank you, my friend. Thanks to all of you for hanging out. Let's really appreciate it. I appreciate the comments as always. And Zaffi says C is quite good. I agree with that one as well. That's another interesting one to watch if you like. Is it Jason Momoa? Is that how you say his last name? He's in that one. That's a fascinating. I like the premise. It's about we all lost the ability to see, and everybody, now has to deal with that. And then now there's people who are sighted, and what does that mean for humanity? So interesting. All right. Well, Simon, I won't take any more of your time. I do appreciate it, and you have a great week, my friend.
You too. Thanks very much again.
Thank you.